who wants to ask the first question here?
I have a question.
Okay.
This is Doris, and it's actually for the Sturdivants. I wanted to know, in your research with the well-known people that were involved with the civic players, did any of them actually do any writing or playwriting for any of the shows, or was it just all financial support or moral support?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Angela. That's her stage name. Yes, there were members who were writing plays. It's not an angle that we've explored much yet, and so I can't tell you which ones or give you examples, but I did see a number of occasions where there was an indicator that they were writing plays and performing them, at least reading them aloud to each other as a group, but maybe even performing them. So it'll be something we look into some more.
Yes, and this is Rick. Actually, in the very early days, before they actually started doing full memorized stage plays, they were doing a lot of scripting themselves, and then doing those readings to each other. It started out in before 1915, before there was a drama club even. Some of these folks were reading plays or writing and reading their own scripts. Grace Casey, who was one of the early historians and was involved with the drama club, talked about, she said that what they would do is they'd sit down in straight back chairs and they'd read the parts, that each one had. And there was only a limited form of dramatic expression in them. It was basically just rote reading. She said, we were too scared to think of anything else for many years. And it wasn't until 1928-29 season that the drama club started doing their own productions and memorized their parts. And they still had to use a lot of offstage prompters just to get through the performance. But that was the production year 28-29, when they were amazed because they made $1,500 profit for the season.
We'll find out.
Can I join?
more.
Can I add something there? You mind, Chris? This is Chris.
Hi, Chris.
Lillian Bueno McHugh de la Torre wrote some of the plays.
Yes,
I just
she
have
did.
to. I have to get a in for Lillian. One of my favorite people.
Yes,
in the
and thank
history.
you. Yes, indeed, she did write plays and they performed them. So
And I
there's
think,
one for
and I
you,
think a
Dory.
tremendous amount of that work, went on before they hired Grout. So back in the 1930s, especially, they were doing a lot of those kinds of things and the sort of writing on their own that Chris just mentioned.
Thank you.
All right. Who wants to ask the next question? Go ahead and just unmute yourself. We'll make it easy. Well, here, I'm going to throw one out while everyone else is thinking. I think this is a question for everybody. It's a question I like to ask. I asked the last one, and I like it as I think it's a softball question. We'll see if you have an answer. Is there anything that you ran into while conducting your research that you thought was interesting, but didn't fit into your paper or didn't fit into your presentation? Anything that you stumbled across that you think is interesting, but just didn't come up in your in the presentation you just gave?
That's a good question. I don't have an answer yet, but I'll think on it.
No one's got an answer to that one.
I will say, I have to throw in something. I was really spent a lot of time researching, and I really found out that there is just so much about the Prohibition era that really needs to be uncovered and looked into for local history, for the benefit of local history. When I said there were 190 articles indexed, there were probably lots of arrests and lots of things that just didn't get into the newspaper. But I would really recommend that some young scholar might want to really look into that. And it appears to me that the Colorado Springs, that bootlegger that I showed that was killed in a Chicago style shootout was actually a link between the Pueblo and the Denver crime families. And I think that's not been explored the way it could be if anybody's interested in that sort of a topic. So I'll just throw that one out.
Okay, one of the things that I was kind of surprised by, one of the articles that I found was in October 1979. It was just about the same time that Orvis Grout had retired. And the article was titled "Curtain May Close on the Civic Theater." And so what was happening at that point, and that's one of the things that got the Civic Theater into trouble and ultimately destroyed it, was that the Fine Arts Club decided they wanted to charge the Civic Theater players rent. And the rent would be based on how many performances they were going to do, basically how long they were going to use the theater space for their productions, for both for building the sets and practicing and then actually doing the performances. And so a whole controversy came up because when the agreement had been cut for the then civic players to use the drama club actually to use the Fine Arts Center, the new Fine Arts Center, they understood that they would be able to use that space for free, or at least to pay for electricity and some of the basic costs of maintaining it, but they wouldn't be paying rent for it. But nobody could find the 1935 agreement between Alice Bemis Taylor and the drama club to use the Fine Arts Center basically for free. And so people who were involved in the Civic Theater Board of Directors were claiming that the Fine Arts Center people were hiding the agreement. They knew that they had it and it was in the vault, and they weren't going to show it to anybody because they wanted to charge rent. Well, it was interesting because when Kathy and I were doing research in the Pioneers Museum, in the rather extensive collection that was donated there, they have all of the minutes from the Board of Directors meetings going all the way back to 1916. And one of the documents that Kathy sort of, I think by accident, made a copy of was the 1935 agreement.
I have it.
We have the agreement. It's signed by the Fine Arts Center representative, but no one filled in the signature block for the drama club. so there's more to explore there. But ultimately, that was the undoing. The fact that the Fine Arts Center wanted to charge the Civic Theater for using that floor space was the undoing. And there were a lot of efforts to replenish the budget for the Civic Theater. Max Morath, for example, in the early 1980s, held a ragtime concert. And was trying to raise money through that to help, keep the theater group going, but it didn't work out. And so, as we said on our slides, ultimately they folded. And the Fine Arts Center will not admit, by the way, if you go on their website, they will not admit that the Civic Theater just died. They give some subsequent names coming up to the present for what that's called, but it wasn't the Civic Theater Group.
There's a question in the chat. Did the agreement say no rent?
Yes, no rent. Basically,
Yes.
they would pay the basic expenses for electricity and that sort of thing, but they would have free of charge ultimate use for as long as they existed.
But I don't think anyone currently is attempting to sue Alice Bemis Taylor for this.
Well, there was further controversy about what she said in her will and things like that. It got pretty nasty.
Yeah. Histrionics.
Yeah. And the Civic Theater by that time, when Grout left, it just started to go downhill. They had a series of directors that just couldn't make it go. Which
Thanks.
kind
Any
of
other?
speaks to Grout's, the extent of his contribution to the effort.
Jordan, did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm not sure there's an answer to it, but I was curious because I was thinking of how like masonry work, they used to sign it. And in more modern day, nobody signs anything. It's usually a corporation or a company and they don't sign their work. But I'm kind of curious if maybe in the past they signed their work on the jewelry, like on watches or I don't know if like, because it used to be that individual craftsmen would sign. I mean, maybe some stuff was made in a factory, but maybe if some of the stuff from that time period still existed, maybe they were signed. I don't know if you know that or not.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. Yeah, let's go on a field trip and let's go look for all the jewelry hand engraved, because that would be my next.
I would love to look for things like that just to find out if that's what happened, like in some,
Yeah,
I don't know where you'd find it, but I used
slowly
to go
over
antique
time.
shopping with an aunt and we would find all kinds of things. So you never know.
You're right. You never know. Thank you.
Any
John, I had a general answer to your question.
Okay.
It zooms out quite a bit. But since I haven't done a research thing like this before, I was amazed at how accessible our resources are. And you don't have to be anyone. I mean, probably you need to be polite, but it was just amazing that people are so willing to help and schedule appointments and email. And it's just the spirit of learning is, what the library is about. And it's through and through. So that's amazed me. And it just made my presentation more energizing.
Also, and then do you have any other advice? And this question could be for everyone, but say someone's watching this 6 months from now on YouTube and they're thinking about getting involved in the next year's symposium. Does anyone have any advice about getting started with research? Because I know that can be the hardest part, right? Is where do you really begin? Like, do any of the three of you have any advice on that?
Well, obviously one is the Pikes Peak Library District, special collections. And that's one reason, again, why I kind of tried to list the places every time I got an opportunity, because you're right, Lindsay, we've gotten so much help all these years, and I agree with you. I appreciate the help. I realize that people could be rude, but I don't always appreciate how easy our access is. And you're right that it is. We're handling things that probably some people in other communities maybe, or other kinds of institutions, would not let visitors handle at all, or would be leaping all over us about gloves or something. And we have a lot of trust and good faith, and people will train you how to handle it if that's necessary. But yeah, I was glad to hear you say that, because as you experienced, hopefully through all this, everybody's friends with each other. We're all just mutually supportive, which is great.
And things like are people like Chris Nickel and Kathy Sturdivant, who have participated in these things for a number of years now and are very familiar with the local Pikes Peak region history. I would say contact them personally on email or give them a phone call and say, I'm interested in this year's symposium, and do you have any suggestions for possible topics that would be manageable for me? I hate to volunteer for you, Chris, but I know my wife would be happy to give suggestions.
It's okay, thank you.
Both of these ladies have a wealth of knowledge that they'd be happy to share, because there's much more to research than any of us are going to be able to do in a lifetime.
I do love the advice of come down to special collections, though, or regional history and genealogy, I guess is what we're called now.
Well, yes, absolutely. And on the subject of genealogy, there are so many ways that people could do something historically significant and interesting with a genealogical topic. And so one of the things that I always tried to teach people when I taught classes in how to do your family history in historical context is to do that, is to convert whatever piece of your family history fascinates you and you realize there is a historical context that you maybe could research, go to some place like particularly a library that has both. But even if they didn't, you know, to say, if you're afraid, and sometimes I won't speak for John or any of the archivists, but sometimes if you're a genealogist out there, sometimes genealogists have been sort of likely to put upon a person who's trying to be there to help others do research by maybe talking too much about the family stories. And so one of the things a genealogist could do is learn to say, I'm researching this gentleman who happened to be mining in Cripple Creek in this year, rather than necessarily saying, let me tell you all about my grandfather and why I want to research it. Make it a larger context and you get a lot, I think, a lot more help from folks. But the help is always there.
Yeah. And once you decide on a topic, the people at the Pikes Peak Library Special Collections will be more than willing to sort of guide you into what source of what the sources they have, or to tell you where there are other sources, like in the Tut Library or the Pioneers Museum, that you might want to look at to augment your research. Once you get to know people who work in the special collections like that, and they get to know you, they will bend over backwards to help you fill in the blanks.
Well, thanks for that. Any other final questions here before we wrap things up in 2023? I know we are over time. I apologize. There were some technical difficulties. All right. Well, this then does wrap up the 2023 symposium.